Today on The Divide, two Seattle police officers could lose their jobs over the January 6th insurrection, the key piece of evidence that investigators should turn over to the public immediately. Also, all eyes are on Washington's 8th congressional district as Republicans hope it will help them flip the House.
Not blue or red. It's let's just get stuff done.
Plus, what will it take to get our region's tourism back to pre-pandemic levels?
We need to invest in the streets. We need to invest in the experiential nature of our city.
That and more as we attempt to bridge the divide. Hello and welcome to The Divide. Thank you so much for joining us. Two off-duty Seattle police officers could be fired after the release of a 6-month investigation that looked into their actions in Washington, D.C. on the day of the Capitol insurrection. You may recall that in the days after the January 6th riot, it came to light that at least 6 officers from SPD had either been at President Trump's Stop the Steal rally or, more concerning, at or in the Capitol building. Of course, anyone who pretended to know was just speculating until now. Seattle's Office of Police Accountability releasing the results of its investigation, finding no wrongdoing against 4 of the officers, but revealing that 2 were caught on video in a restricted area outside the Capitol while the siege unfolded, a violation of both the law and SPD policy. Seattle Mayor Jenny Durkin.
There is a huge difference between being at a rally that is political in nature, and even though I obviously disagreed strongly with all of the premises supporting President Trump at that time, exercising those First Amendment political rights is very different than going into a restricted area, going past police lines, and actually observing illegal conduct. One is protected, the other is absolutely contradictory to what police officers swear to do.
So from here, it will be up to interim Seattle Police Chief Adrian Diaz to determine discipline. The OPA can only make a recommendation, which in this case is that the 2 officers be fired. OPA Director Andrew Meyerberg writing, while they smiled and looked at the Capitol building as captured by the video stills, rioters defiled the seat of American democracy and assaulted numerous fellow officers, that they, as SPD officers, were direct witnesses to the acts that were going on around them, including the scaling of the Capitol building walls, but did and said nothing, compounds this. But here is the problem that I have from the perspective of someone who is trying to inform the public. The OPA refuses to give us the images of these officers, the images that are central to the case and central to the call that they lose their jobs. The OPA apparently received 3 still images from the FBI. The images were just screen grabs taken from a video that apparently the FBI would not give them in full, so they just sent the 3 still images. So the provided the stills that were pertinent to the actions of the officers. We asked OPA for the same stills they got from the FBI, in particular the images that allegedly show the officers in a restricted area with obvious criminal behavior happening around them. OPA told us this: we are not going to make the photograph public until the case has proceeded through the Loudermill hearing. That's the meeting with the chief. The chief has made a disciplinary decision and the case is formally closed. This is to ensure that the officers receive due process prior to a disciplinary decision being made. And that would be all well and good if that ship hadn't already sailed. OPA goes to great lengths in its investigative documents to describe what the photos show, writing, the second and third photographs showed the officers directly next to the side of the U.S. Capitol building. From the vantage point of the photographs, demonstrators were on the steps of the building, as well as climbing the scaffolding, and numerous demonstrators were surrounding the building. The OPA director then goes on to opine about how damaging the images are to the officers' claims that they did not realize the area was restricted and did not see criminal behavior going on around them. The OPA director writing, based on all of the evidence adduced by OPA during this investigation, including the site visit conducted, a review of the photographs of the positioning of the officers, OPA simply does not believe the explanation proffered by the officers to be credible. So I would ask this: if you've made public an investigation that includes a vivid description of the photos and a conclusion that the photos prove the officers basically lied to investigators about their knowledge of the situation, it seems that releasing the images themselves would not do any more to rob the officers of due process than releasing the report itself. Unless, of course, the concern is showing the officers' faces in the photograph before they receive a formal discipline. But the reality is that the officers chose to be in a public setting that day, where hundreds, if not thousands, of people were taking videos. They have no more right to privacy than that guy who donned horns and a fur hat while shirtless in the U.S. Capitol. Not to mention that the FBI released hundreds of images of people accused of breaking the law that day. So we also asked the FBI, by the way, for the same images they gave to OPA, no luck. The reality is that if OPA were so concerned about protecting due process of these officers, it wouldn't release anything until discipline is finalized, and its director certainly would not do a news interview the same day the report came out. But since OPA already did both, it should immediately release the images that it says are so damning. Not because I don't believe that the images show what OPA says they show, but because as a reporter, I'd rather not rely on a 21-page investigation when the public can see what happened with their own eyes. All right, coming up after the break, switching gears a little bit here. If Republicans want to retake the House in 2022, they'll have to come through Washington state to do it. We'll discuss also. Tourism is absolutely vital to our state's economy. Later, we're going to talk about the challenges in getting folks back to Seattle, not just after COVID, but amid other worsening crises. We'll be right back. Republicans hope to retake the House in the 2022 midterms, but the path to get there may have to come through Washington state. And for that, we take you to the 8th District. It is a congressional district we have talked about an awful lot on this show, and I swear it's not just because I live there, it's because it really is one of the last remaining swing districts in our state, and for that reason, it's fascinating. It's been the subject of national intrigue since Kim Schreier flipped it blue in 2018. Before then, of course, it had always been red. It was represented by Dave Reichert for some time. Now, for some confounding reason, the National Republican Congressional Committee didn't put a whole lot of effort into winning the seat back in 2020. Despite the fact it had been Republican, only blue for 2 years. But don't expect that to be the case this time around. The NRCC has listed the 8th as one of nearly 50 districts it will target with its resources for the midterms. And so far, let's show you how the 8th District race is shaping up. Obviously, we expect Kim Schreier to run again. Jesse Jensen has re-entered the race. Remember, he ran against Kim Schreier in 2020. He plans to do it again. And then there's Matt Larkin, another Republican. You probably recognize his name. He ran for Attorney General this last time around against Bob Ferguson, but lost. As I mentioned, Jensen officially launched his second campaign for this seat this past week. We met with him in Snoqualmie and talked about what he thinks will be different this time around and also how he plans to paint his opponent.
I think a lot has stayed the same and a lot has changed, right? What stayed the same is I'm still the same guy. I'm a 4-tour U.S. Army Special Operations combat vet that's going to put the needs of the voters of the 8th Congressional District first. What has changed is the national mood. President Biden and the far left has overreached. Congresswoman Schreier is defunding the police here at home, voting for almost $2 billion to protect herself at the Capitol. She's not showing up to work. She took some time off or worked remote, gave her proxy vote on some of these key votes. So, again, we're out here and we're insistent on focusing on the needs of the 8th Congressional District and, whatever the district may look like after redistricting. And, we're pushing that servant leadership message because we know that it resonated last time.
One of the things you mentioned is that Kim Schreier was absent and did some remote voting. Is that because of the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, that's what she claimed, but, I couldn't.
That's
a
good excuse,
well,
isn't it?
Yeah, but I couldn't jump out of the airplane via proxy vote when I was in the military, right? Like dangerous situations, getting shot at, right? I'm going to do the job, and I think that that's important for the voters of the 8th Congressional District. And look, I might not even run against Congresswoman Schreier. At the end of the day, the things that are important is common sense, getting stuff done, the policies, local issues that matter, infrastructure, the economy, law and order. I have a neighbor in my Tahali, where I live. He's an African-American SWAT officer, and he was rescuing a 2-year-old, racing to that scene, and he rolled his police car. somebody pulled up next to him, took a selfie, shouted obscenities at him, and drove off. That's where we are today, right? The system is broken. My father-in-law has been waiting for a medical evaluation with the VA for over a year. You know, I talked to my friends, friend's family that didn't come home from combat, and they're still struggling with the VA. The system is broken. This is a calling, Brandi. This is why I'm running, because we need to help people, and it doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat.
You mentioned in a tweet today the phrase far left. You mentioned it again in an answer sitting here. Last time you did exactly what Dino Rossi did, you know, tried to paint Kim Schreier as this member of like the socialist alternative, far left. Are you still going to paint that picture of her, that she's fringe?
What I'll point to is she votes like one. Her voting record, 95% with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She's got a 38% voting record with Kathy McMorris Rodgers, who's named as one of the most bipartisan members in the U.S. House in the congressional delegation, right? Congresswoman Schreier, at nothing else, has seemed to be a rubber stamp for Nancy Pelosi. And I think that you're going to see that on tax hikes legislation she's going to vote for. I mentioned it earlier, she voted to defund the police here by cutting cops' grants, but she still voted to increase her own security at the Capitol.
Obviously she's a Democrat, but I don't see fringe. So are you diluting that phrase? Like if somebody called you right wing, I'd say they were full of
just the other day.
So I'll say that there. That's,
all right.
And I've said that last time, is that neither of you are fringe. So does it dilute the phrase far left to call someone like Kim Schreier far left?
What I'll say is I won't call Kim Schreier far left. I'll call her voting record far left. And what's worse, the fact that she's not voting her conscience, or that she is in fact a true believer and she's voting the way her heart leads her, and she's just saying what she needs to in this very moderate district.
We all know that in the midterms, the party in power tends to lose seats, which bodes kind of well for you. It's, I think, a thing in your favor in terms of where we're at and the timing. But there's this sort of unknown about what's going to happen with President Trump, whether he's going to try to run a campaign in 2024. And we've seen, Dan Newhouse, Jamie Herrera Butler, they now have pro-Trump challengers. And so there's going to be this interesting dynamic with the Republican voting base. How do you think that impacts you, if at all?
Well, look, I'm focused on the voters of the 8th. Whatever the presidential election in 2024, it's a long ways away. The Republican nominee is going to be the Republican nominee. What I'm fighting for is some of the same things I talked about last time. Again, I mentioned it earlier, economy, right? We've got 13% inflation because, of these long lists of liberal wish lists. You look at an infrastructure plan that doesn't have anything to do with infrastructure. It should be concrete, water, and broadband, and fiber. Speaking of broadband, I wanted to pass universal broadband last time. We need to make sure that we're decreasing that gap between rural and urban communities, between the rich and the poor. We need technical education in our high schools. I have 5 brothers-in-law. They're elevator mechanics. They're crane operators. They're working in gravel yards. If they would have gotten that training in high school, they could have been in the job force several years earlier. Would have been better for them. Would have been better for us. I just came from Oak Harbor Freight down in Pierce County. They can't hire dock workers. 200 applications, 4 people showed up. People are applying so that they can get their unemployment and stay home on the couch, right? This is socialism. This is what we saw, and it's not working. Oak Harbor's paying $19.75 for one of those dock workers. That's a good wage. That's above what Sawant is wanting to pass in Seattle, right? And can't get folks because these small businesses are competing against this high unemployment rate. So just common sense stuff, right? That's what the voters of the 8th Congressional District want. They're fiercely free thinking, right? Not blue or red. It's let's just get stuff done and let's have it make sense.
And I should note, we do plan to have Congresswoman Schreier on in the coming weeks, as well as the other Republican in the race, Matt Lurkin. Also, Jensen said something in that interview, I don't even know if I'm going to run against Congresswoman Schreier. I think what he's referring to there is we're in the middle of redistricting. And so if you have the 8th district that changes enough where, one of the candidates feels as if they can't win there, I guess things could be different. That won't take effect until 2023, but I think that's what he's referring to. So for now, we do expect them to run against each other. Also, you can watch more of that interview if you download the Divide podcast. We always post full interviews on Mondays after the show, so please make sure to do that. All right, coming up after the break, what will it take to get tourism back to where it was before the pandemic, or even better? The president and CEO of Visit Seattle joins me next. Stick around. So we've been talking a lot on the show about how Seattle is the economic engine for the state. It's why regardless of how you might feel about Seattle, the city's post-pandemic recovery is important to all of us. And of course, a big part of that is getting tourism back on track. And it's not just tourists. We want business travelers, conventions, all of it to return. More people, more business, more revenue, it all adds up. The entity tasked with selling Seattle to the outside world, so to speak, is called Visit Seattle, very apt. I sat down with President and CEO Tom Norwalk to talk about the challenges ahead. It's great to have you here. And in fact, it's fitting for the topic that we're discussing. Tom is our first in-studio guest in more than a year.
Awesome.
Post-pandemic. So I think as we talk about where the city is going and the recovery, this is part of kind of getting back to normal as well.
It's great, and it should be. In our business for travel, it's face-to-face, it's experiential, so I'm honored to be your first in-studio guest.
Yeah, Tom and I go way back. So, and you know, you guys during the pandemic, you weren't silent. I would get a lot of updates from you guys about sort of key indicators of where Seattle was at, where tourism where the economy was at. What are some of those indicators and what are they showing you now?
Well, they're showing incredibly fast and kind of almost snapback recovery in some sectors of the business, certainly nationally. In Seattle, we've had a long 16 months, slow recovery, if you can even call it recovery. And that all changed in May. So we've been really on a fast track since May. But yeah, our organization has been fairly quiet early in the pandemic because as a marketing organization, a champion for the region, trying to encourage visitations, that just was not happening. So we've now started to be a little louder and we're promoting. We're working obviously with the city and a lot of our partners on trying to bring people back to the city and to the region. And it's going well.
Where are some of the sectors you're seeing a rebound, a quick rebound?
A quick rebound in really leisure travel. And I think we were not encouraging out of the region travel into the marketplace during the pandemic. You know, we followed so many safety protocols and our region has been, you know, incredibly strict nationally in terms of following the protocols. And that's helping us now, I think, as we look at the high vaccine rates and bringing people back. But we're seeing leisure visitors really from all over now. It was local, it was regional at first, from some of the surrounding counties, and now we're seeing visitors from all over the country. And we know that will continue to grow because it's really leisure is the only market now that's really has the ability to travel, and it's not as influenced as business travel is at this point, or even the meetings and conventions. So it's all leisure.
Despite the dramatic, devastating impacts that the pandemic and the lockdowns had on tourism and the city's economy, you guys were still in line with the governor?
Yeah, we were in line in the sense that we knew it was a long road to get there. And I think from talking with colleagues not only around the country and around the world, we knew that ultimately the vaccine rates, the infection rates, hospitalizations, all of that would be critical to opening up again. And it would be critical to consumer confidence. And I think that's why travel started local. It started with road trips. People felt safe in their car. They felt safe, not necessarily maybe coming to the city, but going out to the region, rural areas, and a lot of our outside the city regions really flourished during the pandemic because people wanted to be out and they wanted to be safe. So we really didn't have a lot of pushback on restrictions.
The reason we go way back is back when I was a radio reporter, we always used to connect on stories, and you guys would call it, I think perhaps because it's PC, the street scene. In downtown Seattle, you know, meaning the increase in homelessness, drug abuse that's out in the open, and you guys would get complaints from tourists and conventions about, you know, the street scene is really out of control. Well, it's arguably much worse than it has been in previous years. So all the coverage, all the headlines around that, how does that, in your estimation, influence the willingness of people to come here for big conventions, to come here for tourism?
Well, it's an elevated subject, obviously, in the last 16 months. It's been an issue in our downtown region, I would say downtown core, for a number of years. And I would also say that we're at times our worst critics about how downtown is coming along and how you experience it now. It's still a factor, and I think, Brandi, honestly, I mean, Seattle spent way too much time in the news for 16 months. Some of it deservedly so, but you know, the blow up of that and the impact has been, I wouldn't say severe, but it's been something we're dealing with now. We've got meetings and conventions, decision makers that live in other markets, that have a large geographical base of delegates and attendees. And they're hearing from some of their attendees that they don't really think they want to go to Seattle in 2022 or whenever, because it may not be safe. And so we're really taking the tack that that's really not the case, that seeing is believing, and we're inviting out, and now more so than in the last 16 months, we've got planners and site inspections taking place, bringing people to the city, letting them experience it. And it's more often than not, we're finding groups are saying, oh no, we're going to come. This is great. It's changing. Businesses are reopening. We still have way too many closed storefronts downtown. We still have an element of street scene, of that perception of safety, but it's really not as bad as some people have made it out to be. And yet, honestly and transparently, it's still an issue. And I think it's still not where we think we want to be. And I think the failure broadly of all of us to address and really find some cure for chronic homelessness and some remedy is still our biggest challenge as a city. And I think that will be our next gateway to figure that out. And until we do that, I think the people that come are surprised that we as a city haven't found a way to make that better.
Yeah, a beautiful, smart, tech-savvy city like this.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just ask you, Tom, to wrap up. I'm hoping this is going to be the real summer of love. Not the summer of love from last year, but the true summer of love. So what is your, I guess, for people who are watching that don't live in the city of Seattle, I hear from a lot of them who are like, I'm not going to Seattle. What is your explanation to them about why it matters to the entire state that downtown recovers, that tourism comes back?
It's such an economic engine for the entire region, for sure, and the state. And Seattle is our gateway. We promote it as a global gateway, and the developments taking place at our airport, at SEA, the International Arrivals Facility, our waterfront that's changing, Climate Pledge, our $2 billion convention center addition, which opens next summer. All of those things are really economic magnets and demand generators, and business that comes to the city spends time certainly in the city, but they go everywhere around the region and around the state. So employment, tax generation, the benefits of all that spend broadly, and again, small business, has a ripple effect around. And I think a lot of people would say, as Seattle goes, so goes the region. And I think that there's some truth to that. This is an incredible city, and I think we're looking at a long-term recovery that really is better than we were before. We hit record tourism numbers in 2019. And as we look forward, we think we'll be back and probably surpass that with everything happening in this region. So we need to invest in the streets. We need to invest in the experiential nature of our city. And if it doesn't feel safe, if there's a perception that it's not, that is a killer for travel and tourism, especially international guests that have not come back yet, and will start to come back hopefully later this year, but certainly into 2022 and 23. So we have work to do. There's no question.
Yeah, and it's a team effort. Everybody involved, politicians, business,
it's
private
everybody.
sector, everyone. So.
And it's not. We can't point fingers, and it's easy to have a lot of complaint letters that come in, and we really don't send those to. We're not trying to say this is someone's fault at City Hall.
Yeah.
But how we respond and what we do, it's all of us, and we need to do something different.
Yeah. Sometimes I point fingers, but you don't have to.
You can do that.
I'll point fingers.
You can do that.
Tom off the Tom Norwalk, Visit Seattle. We do appreciate you joining us and being back in studio with us. And
I love it. No,
here's
thank
to
you.
A great summer.
Anytime.
So.
Anytime for you.
All right, thanks, Tom, for joining us. You can hear more of our conversation coming up tomorrow on the Divide podcast. Also coming up tomorrow, Q13 News This Morning. I'll see you then.